Walking up to the curb, heart already hammering with the stress of moving day, I saw the empty space where the large rented moving truck had been parked just an hour before. Panic flared hot and fast, immediately followed by a chilling dread. It wasn't just inconvenience, it felt targeted. This was our new home, the place we'd sunk everything into for peace and quiet, and already something felt wrong. This was the moment I realized our HOA board saw our property as their personal kingdom to control. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you believe homeowners should have rights, not be bullied by power-hungry neighbors, hit that like button and subscribe for more. We had chosen this neighborhood specifically for its reputation for being quiet and family-friendly. After years in a bustling city, the thought of a small yard, friendly waves from porches, and predictable routines felt like a dream. The HOA seemed standard: rules about lawn care, trash cans, architectural review committees for major changes. We received the hefty binder of covenants, conditions and restrictions, CC and RS, and bylaws during the closing process. We skimmed it, filed it away, assuming it was mostly common sense stuff. We were quiet people, planning no major renovations, just looking forward to settling in and maybe planting a small garden. We weren't rule breakers. We were rule followers by nature, happy to do our part to keep the neighborhood tidy. We introduced ourselves to the few neighbors we saw out during the inspection, planning to properly meet everyone once we were settled. Everything felt promising, like a fresh start in a place where order and respect were valued. Moving day arrived, a whirlwind of cardboard boxes, hired help, and the logistical puzzle of fitting a life into a new space. The large moving truck was parked on the street directly in front of our new house, taking up a considerable length of curb, but we had made sure it wasn't blocking any driveways or mailboxes. It was a temporary necessity, a fact of moving, and we expected it would be there for a day or two as we unloaded. The morning was hot, sweat plastering clothes to skin, but there was an excited energy in the air. We were finally here. Mid-morning, after the truck had been there for maybe 3 hours, one of the movers asked where a specific box was, thinking it might still be in the truck. I went outside, keys jingling in my pocket, ready to open the back. That's when I saw the empty spot. My blood ran cold. A moving truck doesn't just vanish. My mind immediately went to theft, a nightmare scenario of everything we owned disappearing. I frantically asked the movers if they had moved it, if anyone had seen anything. No one had. A neighbor across the street, watering their plants, saw my distress and came over. She hadn't seen it towed, but she mentioned, in a low voice, that the HOA president, Brenda, had been patrolling the street earlier, looking particularly agitated about something. Brenda? I asked, the name unfamiliar. Brenda Jenkins, the neighbor clarified, a slight wince on her face. She's head of the board. Very particular. She likes things just so. Particular didn't even begin to cover it, as I was about to find out. I called the moving truck company, heart pounding, reporting it stolen. They told me to call the local police non-emergency line, which I did. The officer who took the call listened patiently, asked for the truck's description and license plate, and put me on hold. When she came back, her tone had shifted from sympathetic to slightly amused. "Ma'am," she said, "we just got a call from the local towing company. They picked up a moving truck matching that description from your address about an hour ago. Said the HOA ordered it towed for violating a parking rule." I was speechless. The HOA ordered our moving truck towed? Without a warning? On moving day? It felt utterly surreal, like a bad sitcom plot. But the cold, hard fact was, all our possessions were now being held hostage by a towing company at our expense. I called the towing company next. They confirmed the HOA president, Brenda Jenkins, had called them, citing a violation of temporary parking rules. They wouldn't release the truck without payment of the substantial towing and impound fee. I felt a wave of helpless fury. This wasn't just inconvenient, it was malicious. My next call, shaky and fueled by indignation, was to the number listed for the HOA president, Brenda Jenkins. Brenda answered on the second ring, her voice brisk and businesslike. "Yes? Who is this?" "This is Sarah Miller," I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the tremor in my hands. "I just moved into my address. Our moving truck was just towed from in front of my house, and the towing company said the HOA ordered it. Did you authorize that?" There was a pause, and then Brenda's voice, dripping with what sounded like satisfied righteousness, replied, "Yes, I did. You failed to obtain the necessary permission from the HOA board before scheduling your move-in. All moves must be approved in advance, and temporary parking permits for oversized vehicles must be requested and approved at least 72 hours prior. You followed none of the proper procedures. My jaw dropped. Permission to move in? We own the house. And there's nothing in the documents we received about getting permission to move in or parking permits for a moving truck. Brenda scoffed. It's standard procedure in this community to maintain order and ensure minimal disruption. You were sent the homeowner's welcome packet, which outlines all necessary protocols. Your failure to read and adhere to the rules is not the HOA's responsibility. The truck was in violation, and it was removed. You will need to pay the towing fee to retrieve it. And let this be a lesson in following procedures in this neighborhood. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there, phone in hand, completely stunned. Permission to move in? A mandatory 72-hour notice for a temporary moving truck? It sounded utterly nonsensical, borderline illegal. My initial reaction was disbelief, quickly morphing into intense frustration and a growing sense of violation. This was our home, our property, and this woman, the HOA president, had unilaterally ordered our vital moving vehicle towed based on rules I was certain didn't exist, simply because she felt we hadn't shown her or the proper procedures. Enough deference. The movers were sympathetic but unable to work without the truck. The cost to retrieve the truck was significant, a sudden, unexpected drain on funds already stretched thin by the move. Paying it felt like admitting I was wrong, like bowing to an unreasonable, potentially fake rule. But I needed my belongings. With a heavy heart and a promise to myself that this wouldn't stand, I arranged to pay the fee and get the truck back later that afternoon. That evening, exhausted and emotionally drained, surrounded by boxes, I pulled out the thick binder of HOA documents. I found a section on parking rules. It mentioned guest parking, restrictions on commercial vehicles stored in the neighborhood, and rules about not blocking driveways. It said nothing about needing permission to move in. It said nothing about needing a 72-hour advance permit for a temporary moving truck parked on the street during daylight hours. It outlined procedures for violations, typically a written warning, a period to correct the issue, then fines, then potential towing if explicitly authorized in the rules and after due process. Brenda had skipped every single step and cited rules that weren't there. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't a misunderstanding about a minor rule. This felt deliberate. This felt like a display of power, an immediate assertion of control over the new homeowners who hadn't, in her eyes, paid proper homage to her authority by requesting permission. The neighbor's words about Brenda being particular and liking things just so took on a sinister new meaning. My initial impulse to just sigh and move on vanished. This was wrong, potentially illegal, and I couldn't let someone with that kind of casual disregard for rules and other people's property have this kind of power over me. I needed to figure out what my rights were, and what hers, as HOA president, actually were. My first defensive action was documentation. I took photos of the empty street spot, screenshots of the timestamped call logs to the towing company and Brenda, and highlighted every section in the CC and RS related to parking and violations that proved Brenda's claims were false. The days following the move-in were overshadowed by the towing incident. Unpacking felt less like creating a home and more like digging trenches. I received an official-looking letter from the HOA a few days later. It was signed by Brenda Jenkins, president. It stated I had been issued a formal violation for failure to comply with HOA move-in procedures and unauthorized oversized vehicle parking, accompanied by a hefty fine for each violation, plus the cost of the towing and impoundment, which they had apparently paid directly to the tow company and were now billing me for. The letter vaguely referenced the CC and RS, but didn't cite specific sections for the move-in procedures or the unauthorized parking that justified immediate towing. It did, however, cite sections related to fine collection, threatening further action if not paid promptly. Brenda's pressure was escalating quickly. This wasn't just about the towing fee anymore. It was about these new, baseless fines and the principle of the matter. It felt like she was manufacturing reasons to penalize me, doubling down on her false claims. I documented the letter, noting the date, the claims made, and the lack of specific rule references. My quiet frustration began to solidify into a cold resolve. I knew I couldn't navigate this alone. The HOA seemed like a small, private entity, but they had the power to levy fines and put liens on property. I needed professional advice. I spent several hours researching lawyers who specialized in HOA law in my state. I found one with good reviews and scheduled a consultation, compiling all my documentation, the CC and RS, the bylaws, the towing receipt, the letter from Brenda, photos, and my log of interaction. When I explained Brenda's claim about needing permission to move in and a 72-hour permit for a moving truck that didn't exist in the CC and RS, he shook his head. That is absolutely not standard, and almost certainly not permissible under your HOA's governing documents or state law regarding common interest communities, he confirmed. He pointed out the specific sections in my CC and RS that outline the actual violation process: written notice, opportunity to cure, hearing, then fines, and only towing for specific, predefined, and often safety-related parking violations like blocking fire hydrants. Brenda had bypassed all of this. He also noted that using HOA funds to pay for an illegal tow and then billing the homeowner might constitute a misuse of funds or improper assessment, depending on the specifics. The lawyer advised me not to pay the fines or the towing fee reimbursement demanded by Brenda. He outlined a strategy. First, send a formal, certified letter to the entire HOA board, not just Brenda, disputing the violations and fines, citing the specific sections of the CC and RS that Brenda had violated. Lack of proper notice, lack of due process, assessment of fines based on non-existent rules, illegal towing, and demanding reimbursement for the towing fee I had paid, rescission of all fines, and proof of the move-in permission and 72-hour permit rules Brenda claimed existed. This put the burden of proof on the HOA and formally notified the other board members of Brenda's actions, which they might not have been fully aware of if Brenda was acting unilaterally. He also recommended installing a video doorbell and perhaps cameras covering the front of the house, given Brenda's aggressive behavior. Following his advice, I drafted the certified letter, carefully referencing the relevant sections of the CC and RS. It was a long, detailed letter, laying out a timeline of events and citing every procedural violation Brenda had committed. I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested, to the official address for the HOA, requesting copies be forwarded to all board members. The simple act of writing that letter, backed by legal knowledge and documentation, felt empowering. I wasn't just passively reacting anymore. I was strategically pushing back. Brenda's response to the certified letter was swift and furious, though not formal. She didn't respond in writing from the board. Instead, I saw her driving past my house slowly multiple times a day. Then came the veiled attempts at social pressure. At the community mailboxes, a neighbor I hadn't met properly yet made a comment about new people causing trouble and not respecting the rules. It was clear Brenda was talking. One afternoon, Brenda herself approached me while I was getting the mail. She had a stiff, hostile posture. "I received your ridiculous letter," she said, her voice low but sharp. "Frankly, I'm appalled by your attitude. You think you can just move in here and ignore how things are done? We have standards. My decision on the parking violation stands. The fines are valid. Your little letter changes nothing." This was antagonist micro-cameo number 2, the moment she dropped the pretense of procedure and revealed the raw desire for control. "Brenda," I said, keeping my voice calm, remembering the lawyer's advice about documentation and not engaging emotionally. "My letter cited the specific sections of the CC and RS that contradict your claims and show your actions were outside the scope of your authority and violated established procedure. I require you, or the board, to provide documented proof of the rules you claim I violated. If you cannot, the fines are invalid, and I expect reimbursement for the illegal tow." Her eyes narrowed to slits. "Proof? I am the president. My word is the rule. You will pay the fines, or we will pursue further action. Perhaps you aren't suited for a community with rules." She leaned in slightly. "Some people find it difficult to adapt. Maybe you'd be happier somewhere else." It was a thinly veiled threat, a chilling demonstration of her belief that she could bully me into leaving my own home. But seeing her desperation beneath the bluster, her inability to cite actual rules, only hardened my resolve. She wasn't operating from a position of authority. She was operating from a position of perceived, self-granted power, and she couldn't back it up. The harassment continued in petty ways. I received a violation notice for my trash can being visible from the street. It was pickup day, and the can was at the curb where it was supposed to be. Another notice claimed my grass was a quarter-inch too long. Both cited vague CCNR sections that didn't actually support the violation under closer inspection, and neither followed the proper warning procedure outlined in the documents. I meticulously documented each one, taking photos of the trash can exactly where others were, measuring my grass. It was well within the limit, adding these to my growing file. It was clear Brenda was manufacturing violations to increase the pressure and build a false case against me. The more she pushed, the more determined I became. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was defending the integrity of the HOA rules themselves, the concept of due process, and the right of a homeowner to live peacefully on their own property without being subjected to the whims of a power-hungry individual. I was no longer just frustrated. I was strategically preparing for a fight I now knew I could win, armed with facts and the actual rules. The major turning point came not from a new threat, but from my continued deep dive into the HOA documents and state law. I wasn't just relying on my lawyer's initial advice. I was educating myself. I found specific state statutes governing HOAs that reinforced the procedural requirements Brenda had ignored. More importantly, buried in the bylaws section regarding the duties of officers, it stated that any action taken by an officer that incurred significant expense to the HOA, like towing fees, or initiated formal violation procedures, must be approved by a majority vote of the board members unless it was an emergency, posing immediate danger. Ordering a non-offending moving truck towed unilaterally was clearly not an emergency. This was the smoking gun. Brenda hadn't just misinterpreted rules or skipped procedures. She had likely acted against the very bylaws of the HOA by authorizing the tow and billing the HOA, and subsequently me, for it without board approval. My lawyer confirmed this was a significant procedural violation on her part and potentially a misuse of HOA funds, making the initial tow and subsequent fines not just invalid, but potentially actionable against Brenda personally or the HOA for enabling her. Armed with this legal weapon, the irrefutable proof from the HOA's own documents and state law that Brenda had acted illegally and outside her authority, my counter-strategy solidified. It wasn't enough to just dispute the fines. I needed to formally challenge Brenda's actions and her position. The lawyer advised filing a formal complaint with the HOA board detailing all of Brenda's violations of the CC and RS and bylaws, demanding she be censured or removed from her position for malfeasance. In addition to the reimbursement and fine rescission, if the board failed to act, the next step would be a formal complaint with the state agency regulating HOAs and potentially a lawsuit. Meanwhile, Brenda, oblivious to the depth of my preparation, sent another letter, this one even more aggressive. It was a final demand for payment of all accrued fines and the towing fee, threatening to place a lien on my property if payment wasn't received within 15 days. It was a clear act of overconfidence, believing her bluff and intimidation tactics had worked, that I would cave under the pressure. It was the perfect setup for her fall. The climax unfolded over the next few weeks, starting with the delivery of my formal complaint to the HOA board. I sent it via certified mail to each board member's address listed in the HOA directory. I had to dig a bit to find those, as well as to the official HOA address, ensuring they all received it directly and couldn't claim Brenda had intercepted it. The complaint was comprehensive, attaching copies of all evidence, the CC and RS, the bylaws, photos, violation notices, the towing receipt, Brenda's threatening letters, and my log of her harassment. It detailed how Brenda's actions violated multiple sections of the governing documents and state law, specifically focusing on the illegal towing and the lack of board approval and due process. The response was initially silence, a tense pause. Then, I received notice of a special executive session board meeting scheduled to discuss homeowner dispute and HOA operational review. I was invited to attend the portion of the meeting related to my complaint to present my case. I arrived at the meeting room, a small, stuffy space in the community clubhouse, armed with binders of my meticulously organized evidence. Brenda was there, flanked by the other board members. She looked smug, clearly expecting me to stammer or back down. I remained calm and methodical. I presented my case factually, page by page, citing the relevant sections of the CC and RS and bylaws, explaining exactly how Brenda had violated each one, the lack of a valid rule for the tow, the bypass of the warning and hearing process, the use of HOA funds without board approval, the issuance of fines based on non-existent or misapplied rules, the subsequent harassment. I showed the photos of the grass length, the trash can location, the dates of her drive-bys captured by my doorbell camera. I presented the towing receipt and the section of the bylaws requiring board approval for such expenditures. As I spoke, citing rule numbers and dates, I watched the other board members. Their initial polite attention shifted to expressions of surprise, then concern, and finally, clear discomfort. They exchanged glances, looking from my evidence to Brenda, who was becoming visibly agitated, shifting in her seat, her face paling. She tried to interrupt several times, muttering about lies and misunderstandings, but the evidence was clear and laid out chronologically. The truth was revealed not through shouting or drama, but through the quiet, undeniable weight of documented facts in the governing documents themselves. It became clear to the other board members that Brenda had not only overstepped her authority but had actively disregarded the rules she was sworn to uphold and had potentially exposed the HOA to significant legal liability through her actions and the subsequent attempts to cover them up or justify them with fake violations. Seeing her control slip away, Brenda's panic escalated into desperation. She launched into a frantic, rambling defense, claiming I was lying, that she had verbal approval from some board members, which they immediately and awkwardly denied, that the rules were understood, even if not written, that I was a disruptive influence who needed to be handled. Her attempts to regain control and discredit me only made her look more irrational and exposed her power-hungry motives to the other board members. She tried to argue technicalities, claimed the meeting wasn't properly called to discuss her conduct, anything to deflect from the evidence. It was a pathetic, final flailing. Then, perhaps the most stunning moment. A board member interrupted Brenda, his voice firm. "Brenda, the documents are clear. You acted outside your authority. The tow was not properly authorized, the fines were not properly assessed, and the rules you cited for the move-in permission do not exist in the CC and RS. Furthermore, using HOA funds for this and attempting to recover it from the homeowner without board approval appears to violate the bylaws. We need to review the financials related to this tow immediately." This signaled a shift. The board wasn't just hearing a homeowner complaint. They were acknowledging potential misconduct and financial impropriety by their president. As the meeting concluded with a motion to investigate Brenda's actions further and review the HOA's finances related to the tow, Brenda stormed out, red-faced and furious, muttering threats. It was shortly after this exposure at the board meeting, as the other board members initiated their review and likely contacted the HOA's legal counsel and auditors, that the consequences for Brenda began to manifest beyond just losing face. The investigation into her unauthorized use of HOA funds to pay for the illegal tow, combined with her attempts to bill me for it and issue fraudulent fines, uncovered evidence of potential fraud and misuse of her position. It turned out she had falsified records submitted to the treasurer regarding the source of the tow payment and the justification for the billing to my account. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. It had crossed into potential criminal territory. The authorities, likely alerted by the HOA's legal counsel or state regulators reviewing the case, conducted their investigation. A few weeks later, the news rippled through the neighborhood. Brenda Jenkins, the powerful HOA president, had been arrested. The charges reportedly stemmed from the investigation into her conduct as HOA president, specifically related to the misuse of HOA funds and falsification of records regarding the illegal tow and associated fine she had attempted to levy against me. The moving truck incident, her blatant abuse of power, had been the thread that, when pulled, unraveled her entire scheme. In the quiet aftermath, life in the neighborhood settled, though it was irrevocably changed. Brenda was, of course, removed from the HOA board. The fines levied against me were officially rescinded, and the HOA, under interim leadership, promptly reimbursed me the full amount I had paid to the towing company, accompanied by a formal, if rather stiff, apology from the board for Brenda's actions. I still lived in my house. My property was secure. I had stood up to a bully wielding false authority, and I had won, not through shouting matches, but through patience, documentation, and strategic application of the rules Brenda herself had ignored. I kept my distance from most HOA matters, but I made sure to stay informed and maintained clear boundaries. Neighbors who had been cold before were now sheepishly friendly, while those who had sided with Brenda remained distant. That was fine. Sitting on my porch, looking out at the quiet street where the moving truck had once been illegally towed, I felt a profound sense of peace mixed with hard-won wisdom. I had come seeking a quiet life, and I had found it, but only after fighting for it. I learned that standing up for what is right, even when it's difficult and against someone determined to control you, is not disruptive. It is necessary to protect your peace and your rights. My home felt truly mine, defended and secured, no longer under the shadow of someone else's capricious power. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more stories about standing up to HOA bullies.